When you live alone, silence becomes something you stop noticing. It's not comforting, exactly, but it's familiar, the kind of quiet that seeps into your bones until you stop registering it. My apartment had its own rhythm, the faint hum of the fridge, the occasional groan of old pipes, the faraway rumble of a passing bus. Predictable, steady. That's why the first night it happened, it didn't just break the rhythm dot, it ripped it apart. It was almost 2 a.m. and I'd just finished a brutal writing session. The kind where the lines between your thoughts and the screen blur, and the words come out in a fog of exhaustion. My neck ached from hunching over the desk. My eyes burned from hours of staring at white light. I saved my document, closed my laptop, and let my body sink into bed. I don't remember my eyes closing. I don't even think I fully settled into the pillow before I heard it. Click dot click dot click. I froze. It wasn't loud at first. Just soft, deliberate taps. The kind of sound you only notice in a dead silent room. At first, I thought maybe I'd left a tab open with some random sound playing, but it kept going. Steady, methodical, too deliberate to be background noise. My stomach twisted, thought it was typing. I sat up slowly, straining to listen. My living room was only a few steps away from my bedroom, separated by a narrow hallway. I could almost see the faint glow from the modem light spilling under the door. My laptop was in there, closed. Or at least it should have been. Each step I took felt like it was amplified tenfold, the wooden boards groaning under my feet. The clicking didn't stop, didn't hesitate, it just went on, like someone was tapping out a message at their own unhurried pace. When I finally stepped into the living room, the sound stopped instantly. The apartment fell back into that heavy, unnatural silence. My laptop sat on the desk where I'd left it, closed and lifeless in the faint shadows. The keyboard was untouched, the mouse still, and yet the air felt wrong. It's hard to explain unless you felt it yourself, the way the atmosphere seemed to shift. Like the space around you is subtly altered. My eyes darted to the darkened corners, to the reflection of the streetlight in the window, to the chair pushed under the desk. I waited, nothing. I convinced myself I'd imagined it, that maybe the clicking had been a pipe or a neighbor through the wall. I told myself I was just overtired. I went back to bed, eventually falling asleep, though every creak and rustle made my heart jump. When I woke the next morning, I half expected to feel ridiculous about it, but then I saw my laptop. It was on, not just on open, with a document sitting on the screen. I hadn't touched it since the night before, but there it was, waiting for me. My pulse thudded in my ears as I stepped closer. It was only one line, a single sentence, blinking at the top of a blank page, "Don't turn away." I just stared at it for a long moment, the cursor winking at me like it knew I was there. My first instinct was to slam the lid shut, but my hands hovered instead. I checked the file history. The last thing I'd opened was my own writing draft, saved hours before I'd gone to bed. No sign of this document anywhere else. My stomach tightened. That's when I noticed something else. My email was open. I hadn't touched it, but there was one unread message sitting in my inbox. No sender, no preview, just a subject line. Look closer. I almost didn't click it. Almost. The message itself was blank. No text, no signature. No metadata that I could see, just a single attachment. Everything in me screamed not to open it. I knew better. But curiosity, or maybe fear disguised as curiosity, pushed my hand forward. The file downloaded in seconds. I double-clicked it, a video opened. It was shaky, grainy footage of my living room. The angle was low, like the camera was sitting on. The desk itself, it was focused on me. I was sitting at my computer typing, fast. My face was blank, my eyes locked on the screen. The timestamp at the bottom corner made my skin go cold. It was recorded last night. At 2:14 a.m., I had been in bed at that time. I knew I had. My hand slammed the laptop shut, the sound echoing far too loudly in the empty apartment. I stumbled back, my heart jackhammering in my chest. This wasn't possible. I hadn't been here. I hadn't touched the computer. But the footage showed me otherwise. And then I heard it again. Dot click, dot click, dot click. Louder this time. Closer. But it wasn't coming from the laptop dot, it was coming from behind me. I didn't turn around right away. The clicking was steady now, louder than it should have been in such a small room, each keystroke deliberate and sharp. I could feel the vibrations of the sound in my chest, like the air itself was typing. Finally, I forced my body to obey. The room behind me was empty. My worn-out chair was pushed in neatly against the desk. The lamp in the corner still cast its faint yellow glow over the clutter of books and papers. The shadows hadn't moved. But the sound stopped the moment I looked. Silence settled in again, thick and unnatural. I stood there for what felt like minutes, my ears straining for the faintest noise. Nothing. Slowly I turned back toward the desk. My laptop was open again. I was sure I'd closed it. And there it was. New words had appeared on the same document from before. The cursor blinked after them like a patient heartbeat. Why do you turn away? My throat tightened. The words were being typed letter by letter right in front of me. I stepped closer, watching the keys press down one at a time, as though invisible fingers were at work. The message continued. You were supposed to stay. My mouth felt dry. Stay? I whispered before I even realized I was speaking. The typing paused, as if listening. Then it started again, slower this time. Stay with me. A chill rolled down my spine. What do you want? The response came instantly. You'll see. Then, the screen flickered once, twice, and went completely black. The sudden loss of light plunged the room into shadow. That's when I saw it. Just beyond the desk, near the corner where the lamplight didn't reach, stood a shape. Not quite human, not quite anything else I could name. It was tall, unnervingly still, with a faint shimmer to its outline, like heat rising off asphalt. There was no face, just the undeniable sense that it was watching me. It tilted its head slightly, almost curious. Then it stepped forward. I stumbled. Back so fast I knocked into the coffee table. The edge caught me hard behind the knees, and I hit the floor with a thud that rattled my teeth. My vision blurred for a moment from the impact, but I still heard it click, click, click. The sound was right next to me now. I scrambled backward on my hands and heels until my back hit the wall. The typing continued for another few seconds, before stopping abruptly. When I dared to look toward the desk again, the laptop screen was glowing faintly. The document was open, and a new line had been added. Sit down. Every instinct screamed at me to put as much distance as possible between me and whatever this was. But my legs felt locked in place. I don't know why I listened. Maybe it was shock, maybe it was the pull of something I couldn't quite name, but I found myself moving toward the desk. The chair felt cold when I sat in it, as if someone had been there seconds before. The cursor blinked at me. Then more words appeared. Hands on the keys. I hesitated. The typing resumed without my help. Now, I swallowed hard and slowly placed my fingers on the keyboard. They felt stiff, unresponsive. I wasn't typing, but my hands began to move anyway, each key press sharp and controlled, as though my body had been hijacked. Words appeared on the screen, sentences I didn't recognize, even as I typed them. They weren't mine. Some part of me still hoped I was asleep, dreaming, hallucinating. But the cold sweat dripping down my back and the ache in my knees from hitting the coffee table told me otherwise. My fingers typed for what felt like minutes before stopping. Then the screen cleared itself, the words vanishing in a blink. A new sentence appeared in their place. We are not done. The screen went black again. The shadow was gone. The apartment fell silent, as if it had never been broken in the first place. But my hands still tingled with the ghost of movement, the phantom sensation of being controlled. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the armchair, knees pulled up to my chest, staring at the laptop until dawn. When morning light finally filtered through the blinds, I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it, that exhaustion had twisted reality into something impossible. But deep down, I knew better. It wasn't over. and I had the feeling that whatever this was, it had only just begun. By the time the sun came up, my apartment felt wrong. Not just I had a bad night, wrong got different. Rearranged in ways too small to name. It was the kind of feeling you get when you walk into a room you know well, and something is off. Maybe a picture frame is tilted. Maybe a book isn't where it should be. But here, it felt like the air itself had shifted, like the place no longer belonged entirely to me. I didn't want to be here alone again. So I called Ethan. He was the one person I could trust, someone who had known me long enough to tell when I was lying, or worse, losing my grip. I told him everything, right? Down to the video, the shadow, and the words that had typed themselves on the screen. I expected him to laugh or tell me I'd been binging too many late-night horror movies. Instead, he was silent for a long moment before saying, "I'm coming over." When Ethan arrived, the first thing he did was sit at my desk and examine the laptop. "You sure this wasn't some kind of remote access thing, hacker, maybe?" he asked, running a hand through his messy hair. "Hackers don't stand in the corner of your living room," I said flatly. His skeptical frown softened a little, but he still didn't look convinced. "All right," he said finally. "Then let's catch it, whatever it is." We set up my old DSLR camera on a tripod, aimed directly at the laptop. For good measure, Ethan pulled out his phone and set it to record the entire living room from a different angle. The plan was simple. If the typing started again, we'd have video evidence from two sources. Ethan insisted we keep the lights on. "I'm not giving your ghost, or whatever this is, the satisfaction of a creepy dark room," he said, trying to make a joke out of it. But I noticed he kept glancing toward the hallway, his jaw tightening every time the pipes creaked. Hours passed, nothing happened. We took turns dozing on the couch while the cameras kept rolling. At one point, I started to think maybe the thing, whatever it was, only worked when I was alone. Then, around 3 a.m., I heard it click, click, click. It was faint at first, like a distant metronome. I sat bolt upright, scanning the room. The sound was coming from the desk. My laptop had powered itself on. Lines of text spilled across the screen faster than before, the keys snapping down in a frantic blur. The words didn't make sense. At first, a mix of fragments and half-formed sentences, but the urgency in them was unmistakable. Ethan jolted awake, rubbing his eyes. "What the hell? Do you see it?" I whispered. He nodded, his face draining of color. "Yeah, I see it." We both looked toward the DSLR screen. Nothing. The live feed was frozen on a still image of the empty desk from earlier in the night. No typing, no movement. Just static. "That's impossible," Ethan muttered, grabbing his phone. He pointed the camera at the laptop and hit record. The instant he did, the typing stopped. The screen went black. The silence was deafening. Ethan looked at me, frustration etched into his face. "It doesn't want to be recorded." Before I could reply, his phone buzzed in his hand. He glanced at the screen and froze. "It's from you?" he said slowly, holding it out to me. The message on the screen was short, but my blood turned to ice when I read it. "Don't interfere." And below it, my name. I stepped back as if the phone might burn me. "I didn't send that." "I know," Ethan said, though his voice wasn't steady anymore. But something did. Before we could process what was happening, the laptop powered on again. The typing returned, faster and louder this time, the words appearing in bursts. "I warned you. You didn't listen. You made me wait." The sentences blurred into one another until, finally, the typing stopped. On a single line, "Now it's his turn." Ethan stared at the words, his mouth tightening into a thin line. "What does that mean?" I didn't have an answer. Then, without warning, the front door slammed shut. The locks clicked into place one by one, as though turned by invisible hands. The sound was like a gunshot in the stillness. Ethan jumped to his feet and rushed to the door, yanking at the knob. "Open it." "It's locked from the inside," I said. my voice barely audible over the pounding in my chest. I know it's locked from the inside. He snapped, rattling the door harder, and then the typing started again. Only this time it wasn't coming from the desk. It was coming from the walls. Click, click, click. The sound surrounded us, bouncing from every surface. Ethan stepped back from the door, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded. The typing grew louder, faster, until it stopped abruptly. And in the silence that followed, a low guttural whisper slid through the room. "You shouldn't have come." The lights flickered. For a fraction of a second, I saw it. The same shimmering figure from before standing directly behind Ethan. Its head tilted toward me, and even without a face, I could feel it smiling. "Ethan, move," I shouted, but I was too late. I didn't open my laptop for the rest of the day. Every time I passed by it, I avoided looking at the screen, as if eye contact might somehow invite whatever this was to happen again. I tried to distract myself, wash the dishes, reorganize bookshelves, even took a long, pointless walk around the block, but it was impossible to push that video from my head. That timestamp still echoed in my mind, 2:14 a.m., right after I'd gone to bed. It wasn't just that I didn't remember typing. It was the way the figure in the recording moved like me, but not me. By nightfall, I realized there was no avoiding it forever. I needed to watch the footage again, this time without flinching away. I needed answers, even if they scared me. The air in the apartment felt heavy when I sat down in front of the laptop. My fingers hovered over the trackpad. I opened the file. The first 30 seconds were just static and faint breathing. Then, like before, the screen resolved into my desk, my chair, and me head bowed over the keyboard, typing at a furious pace. The angle was odd, slightly higher than my eye level. I leaned closer, watching my face, or what should have been my face. The camera quality was grainy, but I could still make out the faint wrongness. My head moved in jerky, unnatural motions, like a puppet's on tangled strings. My eyes never blinked. The typing was relentless, like the keystrokes were counting down to something, and then mid-sentence the figure froze. Slowly, it turned its head toward the camera. I'd paused the video immediately, my heart hammering. Even frozen, the image made my skin crawl. Its eyes were too dark, too deep, like the sockets were empty, but still staring. Its mouth was slightly open, revealing a shadow inside. That didn't look like a tongue or teeth. The urge to slam the laptop shut was overwhelming, but something kept me watching. I hit play. The figure leaned forward until its face nearly filled the frame. The sound of typing stopped entirely. For 5 full seconds, it just stared into the camera and to me before whispering something I couldn't quite make out. The audio crackled, and then the screen went black. The file ended. I sat frozen, my pulse thundering in my ears. I rewound the last 10 seconds and turned the volume all the way up. The whisper came again, faint, distorted, but this time I caught it. It said my name, and then, "You're next." I backed away from the desk so fast the chair toppled over. My first instinct was to delete the file, but when I clicked on it, the cursor spun endlessly before an error message popped up. "File in use." By what? I disconnected the Wi-Fi, yanked the power cable, but the screen stayed on. The file. Window remained open, unresponsive. The video replayed automatically, but now the timestamp was different, showing tomorrow's date. And there was no me in the chair, just an empty room. The typing started again, faint but clear. I looked down at my own hand, still trembling in my lap. But the sound was coming from the laptop, and the words began appearing in real time. On the screen, "You should never have watched." That was enough. I slammed the lid shut, grabbed the entire laptop, and shoved it into my closet under a pile of clothes like that would somehow smother it. That night, I didn't sleep in my bed. I stayed on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, TV blaring quietly for comfort. Every time I started to drift off, I swore I could hear the faint clicking of keys from behind the closet door. Around 2 a.m., I got up for water. The apartment was dim, but in the reflection of the kitchen window, I could see my living room, and the closet door was ajar. I hadn't left it open. A faint blue light pulsed from inside. I didn't sleep, not because I didn't want to, but because every time I closed my eyes, I swore I could hear faint clicks echoing from the living room. It was never loud, just enough to keep me on the edge of waking, like someone tapping a pencil on the desk across from me. By the time the sun began to bleed pale light into my apartment, my nerves felt like frayed wires. My head throbbed from lack of rest, but my thoughts wouldn't slow down. I kept circling back to the video. The recording showed me typing, but I had no memory of doing it. That was the part that unsettled me most. I could almost explain away the email glitch, the mysterious document, even the lack of a sender, but not that. If I really had been the one typing, then who was in my bed at the time? By late morning, I'd made up my mind. I'd take the laptop to a repair shop, have someone check for remote access, malware, anything that could explain this. I needed a rational answer, and I needed it fast. The guy at the shop looked over the device with a practiced boredom, tapping keys and scrolling. Through settings, I paced behind him like an impatient shadow. After about 15 minutes, he turned the screen toward me. "There's nothing unusual here," he said. "No viruses, no remote desktop activity, no suspicious programs. Honestly, this thing's clean." I stared at the neat rows of diagnostic results. "What about someone logging in from another location?" He shook his head. "If that happened, there'd be traces in your logs. There aren't. You're the only one using this." The words should have been comforting. They weren't. I walked out with the laptop tucked under my arm, the bright midday sun feeling somehow hostile. The logical explanation had just collapsed, and that left me stranded with the irrational. That night, I tried a different approach. I left the laptop closed, unplugged, and tucked away in a drawer in my bedroom. If I could see it the moment I woke up, maybe I could rule out the possibility of anyone sneaking in to use it. Around 1 a.m., I drifted into a light sleep. My dreams were fractured, like skipping film reels, half glimpses of my desk bathed, and pale lights, the clatter of keys in a room I couldn't enter, words forming faster than I could read them. And then, click, click, click. The sound was coming from the drawer. I bolted upright, my heart hammering so hard it made my vision swim. My hand hovered over the drawer handle, too afraid to pull it open. The typing stopped instantly, like it knew I was listening. When I finally yanked the drawer open, the laptop's lid was up, the screen glowing. The document from before was there, but now it was longer. "You're not alone, you never were." The words were repeated over and over, filling the page until they blurred together into a block of black ink. My skin crawled. I reached to close it, then froze. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught movement. My reflection in the dark window above my desk wasn't moving the way I was. The air in the house felt like it had weight now. Every breath I took was shallow, every sound magnified. The walls seemed closer, the corners darker. My body was running on pure adrenaline, the kind that keeps you moving long after fear should have rooted you in place. I didn't know how long. I'd been sitting in the hallway minutes, hours, listening to the silence, but it wasn't true silence. The house had a pulse now. I could hear faint thuds, like footsteps in the walls, and a low hum that seemed to be coming from beneath the floorboards. Bella sat beside me, ears pinned back, her body pressed to my leg. She didn't bark or whine anymore. She just stared down the dark stretch of the hall toward the front door, her breathing slow and deliberate, as though she was waiting for something. And then I heard it. 3 slow knocks, not at the front door, not at the windows, from inside. It came from the door to the basement. The sound was deliberate, too slow to be urgent, too heavy to be an accident. My mind scrambled for explanations I could believe. Pipes, old wood shifting. Maybe a raccoon had gotten in somehow. But no animal knocked like that. No animal knocked 3 times and then waited. Bella didn't move. She just kept staring. Stood, legs stiff, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My hand hovered over the doorknob, my brain screaming, "Don't open it." But the knocking came again, closer this time, almost like whatever it was on the other side knew I was standing there. I turned the lock. The hinges groaned as I pulled the door open, and the darkness below seemed to spill up the stairs, swallowing the light. The basement smelled of damp earth and something metallic. My skin prickled. At first, I saw nothing. Just the bottom of the stairs, swallowed in shadow. Then my eyes adjusted, and I realized there was someone standing at the base. They were completely still. Too still, it was me. Same clothes, same hair, same terrified expression frozen on their face. But my eyes were pitch black. "Don't," my voice came from their mouth, though the lips barely moved. "Don't let it in." I stumbled back, nearly tripping over Bella. Figure tilted its head in a way that felt wrong, like the movement of a marionette. And then, with a speed I couldn't process, it started up the stairs. I slammed the door and threw the lock, pressing my back against it. Something hit the other side so hard the wood bowed inward. Bella barked, once sharp, and panicked. The pounding stopped as suddenly as it had started. Silence again. I stayed there all night, sitting against the door, gripping Bella's collar like she was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. Every so often, I thought I could hear faint breathing on the other side, but I refused to move. When the sun came up, I finally unlocked the door. The basement was empty. No footprints, no sign anyone or anything had been there. But when I turned back toward the living room, there was something new waiting for me on the coffee table. A note written in my handwriting. It said, "Next time, I knock first." And somewhere deep in the house, I heard the sound of 3 slow knocks. The first time I smelled it, I thought my brain was playing tricks on me. It was a faint trace at first, just a wisp of lavender and roses, so subtle I almost missed it entirely. I had been kneeling in the living room of my childhood home, crying. Opened the last box from the move when it drifted past me, a scent out of place in the dust-heavy air. I froze. The scent was so achingly familiar that it pulled me backward through time. I was no longer sitting among boxes and unpacked furniture. I was 8 years old again, sitting on my grandmother's lap as she read me a story, her floral perfume wrapping around me like a soft blanket. But my grandmother had been gone for over a decade. The house was silent, save for the slow ticking of the wall clock. My breath felt shallow, like any sudden movement might scatter the ghost of the scent. It lingered a few seconds more, and then it was gone, leaving only the dry smell of cardboard and the faint tang of cleaning products I'd used earlier that day. I shook my head and forced a laugh that sounded too loud in the empty room. "You're just tired," I muttered. To myself, the move had been exhausting weeks of packing, long drives, restless nights. My brain was probably dredging up old memories as some twisted form of comfort. Still, I found myself glancing toward the hallway, toward her old bedroom. I hadn't been inside it yet since arriving. When I inherited the house, I'd known it would be strange moving back here after so many years. My grandmother's death had been sudden, and the place had been left untouched for a long time before I decided to take it. Most people would have renovated before moving in, but I hadn't had the money or energy for that. So everything still looked almost exactly as it had the last time I visited as a teenager. The faded wallpaper, the squeaky floorboards, the faint sag of the ceiling in the hallway where water damage had once been patched over. Her room was at the very end of the hall. For some reason, my feet started carrying me that way without my mind fully agreeing. I told myself I was just curious, that I needed to decide what to do with it, turn it into an office, maybe. But when I reached for the doorknob, I hesitated. The smell was there again, stronger this time. It was impossible. The bottle of her perfume had been buried with her. My mother had made sure of that. She'd even told me, so I remember her exact words. She'd never want to smell like anyone else's memory. She's taking it with her. And yet, the fragrance seemed to seep through the narrow crack under the door. I leaned closer. heart thumping harder with each slow breath I took. The scent was thick now, almost cloying. I turned the knob. The door creaked open into darkness. I fumbled for the light switch, my hand brushing the cool wall until the bulb flickered to life. The room was exactly as I remembered: bed, neatly made, quilt tucked tight, lace curtains filtering pale daylight. Dust clung to every surface, but the air smelled fresh, like she'd just been here, smoothing the bedspread, humming to herself. I took a step in. The floor groaned under my weight. "Grandma?" The words slipped out before I could stop it. My voice sounded too small, too exposed. I half expected to hear her warm laugh in response. Instead, the house gave me silence. Then, not quite silence. A faint rustling came from the closet. I froze again, my body locking up as though my mind had suddenly remembered an old instinct gone open. It wasn't a real memory, more like a feeling that had always been there. When I was a kid, she'd never let me go into that closet. She'd just smile and say it was messy or full of old junk I didn't need to see. The rustling stopped. I took another slow step toward it anyway. My pulse was a drumbeat in my ears. My hand hovered near the brass knob, fingers trembling just slightly. The smell was overwhelming now, filling every corner of the small bedroom. I pulled the door open. Inside, there was nothing. Just neatly hung clothes in plastic covers, boxes stacked on the floor, and a row of shoes gathering dust. No sign of movement, but the smell didn't fade. I stood there a moment longer, waiting for something. I didn't even know what. Then, without meaning to, I found myself reaching for one of the boxes. It was heavy, lid taped shut, the cardboard soft. With age, my grandmother's careful cursive was written along the top. Keepsakes. My fingers were halfway through peeling the tape when the bedroom light flickered. I turned just in time to see the bulb above me dim, then flare bright, then burn out. With a sharp pop, the room plunged into shadows, and her perfume turned sour like flowers left too long in stagnant water. The house settled into its usual nighttime stillness, a kind of silence that didn't feel peaceful, more like it was holding its breath. I moved through the dimly lit hallway, Bella's nails clicking softly on the hardwood as she followed. Her head was low, ears pricked, tail swaying just slightly, like she was torn between comfort and alertness. The rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy and damp. Outside, the world was black beyond the windows. No street lamps or porch lights to cut through it. That's one thing I wasn't used to. Yet, how absolute the darkness was here. I settled into bed with a book I wasn't really reading, glancing every so often at the doorway. Bella curled up on the floor beside me, her warm presence keeping the room from feeling too empty. For a while, the only sound was the occasional drip of water from the gutters. Then Bella's head shot up. Her ears swiveled toward the corner of the room, the one beside the closet. Her body went still, muscles tight. I set my book down. "What is it, girl?" I whispered. She didn't move her head, didn't look at. Her eyes were fixed on the shadow pooling in that corner, her lips twitching as though she wanted to growl but was holding back. I sat up slowly, following her gaze. The closet door was closed, same as it had been all day. The corner looked no different, just dark, but I could feel something like the air there was thicker, heavier. Bella took a step forward, a soft rumble starting low in her chest. The hair along her back bristled. I slid out of bed, my bare feet touching the cold floor, and reached for the lamp. The second the light came on, Bella stopped growling. Her tail wagged once, uncertain, and she gave me a glance as if nothing had happened. I forced a laugh. "Scared of your own shadow, huh?" But I kept the lamp on for the rest of the night. The next morning, the air smelled faintly of something sweet, something out of place. It wasn't my shampoo, wasn't the scented candle I'd burned in the living room. It was more like fruit left to sit too long. Not rotten, just overly ripe. The smell was so cloying it made my throat tighten. Bella sniffed the air too, whining softly. She went back to the bedroom corner, nose almost touching the wall. I checked behind the dresser, the closet, even lifted the rug. nothing by afternoon. The smell was gone. That night, I left the hallway. Light on and kept the bedroom door open a crack. Sleep came in fits. I would doze off, then wake to the faint sound of Bella pacing. The soft click of her nails moved from the doorway to the far side of the room, then back again. At some point, her pacing stopped. The room was quiet again. I thought she'd settled down until I heard a sound that didn't come from her aunt. Oh, it was faint, just at the edge of hearing, like a low hum or a whisper. I couldn't make out words, if there were any. My first thought was wind, except the windows were shut. The air still. I sat up, straining to hear. Bella was standing, at the edge of the bed, now facing the oaken doorway. Her body blocked part of my view into the hall, but I could see the light spilling across the floor. Then the whispering stopped. I started to relax until the hallway light flickered. Just once, a quick stutter like a bulb about to go out. My stomach tightened. I told myself it was nothing. Old wiring, the kind of thing that happens in houses like this. But then it flickered again, 3 times in rapid succession. And between each blink, the shadows in the hall seemed to shift, growing longer, stretching toward the bedroom. Stay, I whispered to Bella, though I wasn't sure if I meant for her or for whatever I thought I saw. The light steadied. In the morning, there were faint marks on the hallway wall. I didn't notice them at first. It was only when I went to open a box in the corner that I saw thin, uneven lines, about the height of my knees. They looked like scratches, 3 of them, each one shallow but deliberate. Like someone had dragged something sharp across the plaster. I ran my finger over them. The edges were clean, fresh. Bella barked suddenly, a short, sharp sound. I turned and saw her in the bedroom doorway staring not at me, but at the air just above my shoulder. When I looked, there was nothing there. That evening, I decided to keep every light in the house on. It felt ridiculous, like a child afraid of the dark, but the memory of those scratches wouldn't leave me. Bella stayed close while I moved from room to room, her eyes tracking every corner, every doorway. At some point, I realized I was holding my breath every time I passed the hallway. By midnight, I was sitting in bed too wired to sleep, listening to the creaks of the house. Each one felt closer than the last. And then, from the darkness just outside the open door, came the soft sound of breathing slow, steady, and not mine. Bella growled. I didn't move. The attic door loomed above me like a question I didn't want answered. I had passed beneath it dozens of times since moving in. But tonight it felt different, heavier, almost as if something was pressing against it from the other side, straining to be let out. I told myself it was just the creaks of the old house and the leftover unease from that voice earlier. But the thought wouldn't leave my head. The voice was coming from above me. I went about the rest of my evening pretending it wasn't there. I made tea. I scrolled my phone. I tried to read, though every paragraph blurred after a few lines because my ears kept straining for any sound that didn't belong. When the clock struck midnight, the faint thump came again. Not from the walls this time, but directly above. The attic. I froze in my chair, the steam from my mug curling against my face. My first thought was raccoons, or maybe a loose board shifting under some stored junk. But my second thought, the one that wormed its way in and refused to leave, was feet. Small ones, bare. I grabbed a flashlight and climbed the stairs, moving slowly as though any sudden movement might encourage whatever was up there. The house seemed to grow quieter with each step, the air thicker, until I stood beneath the attic hatch. My hand hovered near the pull string, but I didn't touch it. I didn't want to open that door. Not yet. So instead, I pressed my ear to the ceiling, silence, and then softly, as though whoever it was knew I was listening, "Can you help me?" I stumbled back so quickly my shoulder hit the wall. My flashlight nearly slipped from my hand. The voice was closer this time, right above me, not muffled by walls or insulation, directly overhead. I backed down the stairs without taking my eyes off the hatch. My chest was tight, my breathing shallow. This was insane. It had to be my imagination, fed by exhaustion and the house's age, that was all. I returned to the living room and sat rigid on the couch until dawn painted the windows pale gray. Only then did I finally let my eyes close. When I woke a few hours later, sunlight filled the room. The terror of the night felt like a bad dream, though the unease lingered like a shadow in my chest. I decided to prove to myself that nothing was wrong. After lunch, I went up to the attic. The hatch creaked as I pushed it open. A warm, dusty smell wafted out, and the beam from my flashlight cut through the gloom. The attic was small, lined with cobwebs and boxes that hadn't been touched in years. I stepped inside carefully, watching for signs of animals. But there was no droppings. No nests. Nothing. Just dust. Dust thick enough that if anyone had been walking around up here, I would have seen footprints. And yet, near the far corner, barely visible, was the faint outline of a shoe print. Small. Too small for an adult. I stood frozen, my pulse thundering. In my ears, my flashlight beam trembled across the floor. It was impossible. I hadn't been up here since moving in, and no one else had a key. I backed away and shut the hatch firmly. That night, I pushed the couch against the bottom of the attic stairs. It wouldn't stop anything determined, but it made me feel a little better. Or at least it did until around 1 a.m. the sound returned. Not a thump this time. A dragging sound. Like something or someone moving slowly across the attic floor. Then, in a whisper so faint I almost thought I imagined it. Please, help me, before she comes back. The upstairs hallway felt different that night. The air seemed heavier, thicker, as though the house itself had inhaled and was holding its breath. My footsteps echoed faintly on the old wooden floor, each creak stretching out longer than it should. The shadows were deep here, darker than the corners of any other room gathering, along the walls and curling near the ceiling like smoke. I was halfway to my bedroom when I heard it. A faint, rhythmic sound. Tap, tap, almost like fingernails on wood. It came from further down the hall, where the light from the single bulb didn't reach. I froze, my mind scrambling for an explanation, perhaps, maybe, or the house settling. But the sound didn't match any normal pattern. It was deliberate, intentional. Hello? My voice sounded too loud in the quiet. The tapping stopped. Silence pressed in around me. Then came the whisper low, rasping, and so close it seemed to brush my ear. You shouldn't be here. I spun around. No one was behind me. The air was colder now, biting against my skin. A shiver ran through me, but my legs carried me forward, toward the dark end of the hall, as though some invisible force was tugging me closer. The tapping started again, louder this time, and I realized it wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from inside one of the rooms, my grandmother's old sewing room. The door was cracked open, just enough to show a thin sliver of blackness. Within, I reached for the handle, my palm damp with sweat. The smell hit me before I could push it open, fully musty fabric, dust, and something else. Something sharp and metallic like blood. My stomach twisted, inside the moonlight spilling. Through the window barely touched the far corners. My grandmother's sewing table was still there, draped in half-finished projects she never completed. But what caught my attention wasn't the table, it was the shape standing beside it. Tall, thin, perfectly still. Its head turned slowly toward me, though I couldn't make out a face. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought it might burst. I stumbled back into the hall, my hand fumbling for the light switch. When I flipped it on, the room was empty. Empty except for the sewing chair, which was slowly turning on its own, creaking with each rotation. It faced me now. On the seat was a single scrap of fabric, and stitched into it in uneven red thread were the words, "Leave while you can." I didn't remember running back to my bedroom, but suddenly I was inside, the door locked behind me, my breath ragged. My phone sat on the knitstand. I grabbed it and called my friend Mia. It rang twice before she picked up. "Hey, you okay?" "You sound," she began, but I cut her off. "Something's in the house. I'm not imagining it. It's real." There was silence on the line, then a slow exhale. "You should have told me sooner. I know someone who can help, but you have to promise you won't stay there another night. I promised, though I didn't know if I could keep that promise. This was my family's home. Where would I go? Still, the thought of surviving another night here felt impossible. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Every small noise made my eyes snap open. The distant groan of floorboards, the faint rustle of fabric, the quiet, almost inaudible sound of breathing that wasn't mine. And somewhere deep in the silence, the tapping began again. The night pressed in around the house like a living thing, heavy and suffocating. Even with the curtains drawn tight, I could feel the darkness outside, a weight pushing against the glass. My phone screen glowed pale in my trembling hand, the emergency call screen hovering, my thumb hovering over call. But I didn't press it, not yet. I listened. The silence in the house was not true silence. It was layered. Beneath the stillness were faint noises, the kind that could be mistaken for the house settling, but weren't. The soft shift of weight on floorboards, a slow, measured scrape, like something dragging lightly against the wall, and then a breath. I told myself it was my imagination. That's what you do in moments like this. You cling to reason like it's a rope keeping you from falling into the abyss. But the rope was fraying fast. I set the phone down on the coffee table, my fingers curling into fists to stop the shaking. My eyes were drawn again and again to the hallway that led to the back of the house. The shadows there seemed thicker, as if the darkness had pooled and deepened. Bella whimpered. She was crouched low, her ears flattened, her body trembling not. The kind of barking fury she'd shown before, but a low, fearful sound, as if she knew that whatever was here was not something she could fight. Her gaze was locked on the hallway. I swallowed hard and forced myself to move toward the kitchen, keeping my back to the wall, my steps slow and deliberate. The floor felt colder than usual under my bare feet. I passed the table where the vase still lay shattered, tiny shards catching the light from the lamp. They glittered like tiny eyes. Halfway to the kitchen, I froze. From the darkness of the hallway came a sound soft, deliberate, unmistakable. A voice. It was low and raspy, the words stretched and drawn out like they had to be pulled through. Something thick. You shouldn't be here. My breath caught in my throat. The sound wasn't coming from far away. It was close too close. I strained to see through the shadows, but it was like staring into a wall of black water. Something moved within it, shifting just out of sight, its shape impossible to make out. I stepped backward, slow and careful, my heart hammering so hard. I could hear it in my ears. I wanted to run, but instinct told me that sudden movement would be a mistake. Bella growled softly, the sound low in her throat, but she didn't advance. She stayed where she was, as if rooted to the spot, every muscle taut. I reached the counter and, without taking my eyes from the hallway, felt for the drawer with my right hand. My fingers closed around the handle and slid it open. Inside, I found what I'd been searching for, a flashlight. Click. The beam cut through the gloom, catching dust motes in the air like drifting snow. I swept it toward the hallway, nothing. Just the same still darkness, the same pooling shadows. But the beam didn't penetrate far. It was as if the light was being swallowed, absorbed before it could reach the far end. Then movement, a flicker, quick but deliberate, just beyond the edge of the light. I turned the beam toward it and thought I saw a hand pale, thin, fingers too long vanish into the black. A chill ripped through me so violently I almost dropped. The flashlight. I forced myself to speak, my voice cracking. Who's there? Silence. Then another sound closer now. The creak of the floorboard at the hallway's threshold. I took another step back, my grip on the flashlight so tight. My knuckles ached. The darkness seemed to push forward, spilling into the living room like a slow, creeping tide. Bella barked once, sharp and desperate, and then I saw it, not fully, not yet, but enough. A shape emerging from the black, too tall to be a person, its outline shifting like smoke. For a moment, I thought there were two eyes, faintly glowing, but they vanished as quickly as they appeared. The air felt colder, so much colder that my breath came out in a cloud. I backed into the coffee table, nearly stumbling. Something whispered again, the same voice, softer this time, almost like it was speaking inside my head. "You're in my place." I didn't think. I grabbed my phone from the table and bolted for the front door, yanking it open so hard it slammed into the wall. The night air hit me like a slap, but even out there, I didn't feel safe. I turned to see if the shape had followed. The hallway was still dark. The doorway was still empty. But the feeling, the sense of being watched, was stronger than ever. I stood there in the cold barefoot, clutching my phone, Bella pressed. Against my leg, her eyes fixed on the black mouth of the house. And then, from inside, I heard it in 3 slow, deliberate knocks. From the hallway wall, not the front door. Not any door, from inside the house itself. The knocks came again, louder this time, and with them a sound like something dragging. Its nails along the plaster. I realized then that calling for help might not matter, whatever was here. It didn't care if anyone knew, it wasn't leaving. And neither deep down was I the moment I stepped back inside, the house swallowed. Me whole. The warmth I'd felt outside was gone, replaced by an icy chill that clawed at my skin like unseen fingers. The front door slammed shut behind me, and no matter how hard I tried, it wouldn't budge again. Bella whimpered softly at my feet, but her usual courage had vanished into the shadows. I fumbled for the light switch, nothing. The house was plunged into complete darkness, save for the faint glow of my phone's screen. Suddenly, a whisper slid through the blackness, so close it felt like it was pressed against my ear. "You can't leave." I spun around, heart hammering, but saw only darkness. The air grew thick, almost viscous, making every breath a struggle. Desperate, I raised my phone's flashlight, sweeping it across the room. That's when I saw it, my reflection. Or rather, the reflection that should have been mine but wasn't. In the bedroom mirror stood a figure. It looked like me, same shape, same clothes, but its eyes were hollow voids, black pits swallowing the dim light. Its smile was twisted, too wide, stretching impossibly far across a face frozen in cruel amusement. I blinked. The figure mimicked me, tilting its head in that same mocking way I'd seen in the corner weeks ago. "Welcome back," it said, voice layered with my own but distorted, like a scream played backwards. I took a step back, heart pounding. "Who? What are you?" The reflection laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed in the room. "I'm what you left behind," it said. "The part of you that waited in the dark, the forgotten piece." A shiver ran down my spine as memories flooded back the basement. The hiding place, the darkness swallowing me whole when I was a child. I'd buried those memories deep, pushed them away, pretending they never existed. But this reflection, had lived in that forgotten space. It had waited. "You took the light," it whispered. "You took the life. But you left me, the shadow." I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs were frozen in place. The mirror rippled like water, and suddenly I was no longer in my room. I stood in the basement from my memory, the cold concrete walls closing in. The air was damp and stale. From the darkness, the shadow version of me stepped forward. "You can't hide anymore," it said. Panic surged through me. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." Its eyes flashed with anger. "Sorry doesn't bring me back. Now it's your turn to stay in the dark." The walls began to close in, pressing toward me, the air thickening. I screamed, pounding on the invisible barrier that held me trapped. Then, a bright light like sunlight breaking through clouds flooded the room. The basement walls faded. I was back in my bedroom, breathless, sweating. The mirror was just a mirror. The reflection was gone. For a moment, I thought it was over. Then my phone buzzed. A new message from an unknown number. The text was simple: "I'm still here." And in the corner of the room, a faint shadow flickered and smiled. The darkness inside us is not so easily left behind. I woke up suddenly, gasping as if I'd just surfaced from a deep dive. The air was unnaturally still, the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums and makes every breath feel heavier than the last. It wasn't the usual nighttime. noise of creaking floorboards or distant traffic. No, this was a silence so thick it felt like a physical presence, lurking just beyond the edges of my consciousness. I glanced over at the bedside clock, glowing faintly in the dark. 2:43 a.m. Hours ago, I had fallen into a fitful sleep, exhausted but restless. Stress and insomnia had become my nightly companions, and the occasional odd noises outside my house never fazed me anymore. But tonight, something was wrong. Then I heard it. My name, soft, calm, but carrying an unmistakable weight. Mark. The voice was unmistakable, deep, steady, familiar. My father's voice. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted to break free. My father had been gone for 5 years, yet here he was, calling me from the darkness of the living room. For a moment, I convinced myself it was just a dream, a trick my tired mind was playing. But the room felt too real, the shadows too tangible. The weight of the night pressed against me like a physical force, chilling my skin. Mark, the voice called again, firmer this time. Come here. I need to talk to you. I sat up, the blankets slipping off my shoulders. My throat was dry, my mouth tasting like dust and old regrets. Every instinct screamed at me to stay in bed, to ignore what I'd just heard and pretend it never happened. But the voice had a pull I couldn't resist. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, feet hitting the cold floor. The house was quiet, the faint hum of the furnace the only sound. I moved quietly, careful not to wake the dog or anyone else, though I lived alone. The hallway stretched before me, dim and unfamiliar, despite knowing the layout by heart. The moonlight from the living room window spilled weakly across the carpet, casting ghostly patterns that danced with every flicker of the tree branches outside. My feet felt heavy, each step weighed down by some unseen force, like the house itself was urging me to stop, to turn back. But I pressed forward. The voice had called me twice now. I couldn't ignore it a third time. As I neared the living room doorway, my senses sharpened. I could hear the faint creak of a chair shifting, a soft rustle like fabric brushing against wood. The voice was gone now, but its echo lingered, hanging in the thick air like a fading perfume. I paused in the threshold. The living room was cloaked. In darkness, the outlines of furniture barely visible. My father's favorite chair sat facing away, an empty throne holding years of memories. Dad, I whispered, my voice cracking like dry twigs breaking in the silence. No answer, only the cold stillness. Then the scent hit me, tobacco smoke, faint but unmistakable. It was the smell I hadn't smelled since his funeral. The smoke that had clung to his clothes, his fingers stained yellow from years of chain smoking. My stomach twisted. I stepped inside the room, bare feet brushing against the cold hardwood floor. The chill seemed to settle deeper here than anywhere else in the house, like the walls had soaked up every sorrow and loss and held it close. The chair didn't move, at least not at first. But then the faintest sound reached my ears. Wood, scraping softly against the floor. The chair was shifting, angling slightly away from the wall, as if someone had just stood up. Dad? I called again, this time louder. No reply, just the heavy breath of the house settling around me. And then, just behind me, from the corner where the light didn't reach, his voice returned, low and laced with something I couldn't place. You didn't forget, did you? My blood ran cold. The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. You didn't forget, did you? The voice echoed softly from the shadowed corner of the living room. Yet it carried the weight of years lost and promises broken. I swallowed hard, my throat tightening as a cold wave washed over me. Turning slowly, I scanned the dimness, but there was nothing. No figure, no glowing eyes, only the shifting shadows cast by the moonlight filtering through the blinds. My breath came out in shallow puffs, trembling with fear and disbelief. Dad, what do you mean? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. The house felt impossibly cold. The warmth sucked out, replaced by a biting chill that wrapped around my bones. The chair creaked again, the subtle noise snapping my attention back to it. For a fleeting moment, I swore I saw the silhouette of a man slumped deeper into the seat, as if settling in for a long conversation. But when I blinked, the space was empty once more. "You promised," the voice said, quieter now, but no less haunting. "You promised to fix it. You promised to take care of everything." My mind scrambled, trying to piece together fragments of memory long buried. His hospital room, the sterile white walls, the beeping monitors, the smell of antiseptic mixed with old cigarettes. I could still hear his weak voice, barely audible, above the machines. "Promise me, Mark," he'd said, gripping my hand with surprising strength. "Promise me you'll take care of it." At the time, I nodded without understanding, thinking it was just his fear talking. I thought I had time to sort it all out later, but later never came. Now, the weight of that forgotten promise pressed down on me, heavier than any physical burden I'd ever known. I don't know what you want me to fix," I admitted, voice breaking. "I've tried, I swear I have." The air thickened. The shadows along the walls seemed to writhe and stretch as if alive, reaching out with cold fingers. The smell of tobacco smoke grew stronger, filling my nostrils with the scent of loss and regret. "You left it all behind," the voice hissed, twisting like a knife in my chest. "The house, the papers, the memories. You abandoned everything." Images flooded my mind. Dusty boxes piled in the attic, unopened letters, stacks of unpaid bills that had quietly turned into mountains over the years. I'd buried myself in excuses, grief, work, exhaustion. I had avoided the attic altogether, afraid of what I might find, afraid of what I'd have to face. "I didn't mean to," I whispered, tears pricking my eyes. "I thought I could deal with it later, but then everything just got too much." The chair shifted once again, dragging softly against the floor. My father's voice dropped to a low growl, more sorrowful than angry. "Fix it, Mark," it said. "Fix what you broke before it's too late." A cold shiver raced down my spine as the room darkened further. The moonlight flickered, shadows pulsing with a life of their own. My hands trembled, and I clenched them into fists, desperate to hold on to some semblance of control. "Where do I start?" I asked, voice cracking under the pressure. The answer came as a whisper carried on the cold wind from the open window. A direction, a command. The attic. I nodded, though my legs felt weak. The attic. The place I'd avoided since his funeral. The place where all the forgotten pieces of his life waited, silent and accusing. Turning away from the chair, I moved through the dark house, each creak of the floorboards echoing like a warning. The living room light flickered once, then went out, plunging me into near-complete darkness. I pulled out my phone, fumbling for the flashlight app. The harsh beam cut through the blackness, a thin thread of light in a world gone cold. The stairs to the attic groaned under my weight as I climbed, the pull-down ladder squeaking with every movement. The air grew colder still, heavier with dust and forgotten years. When I pushed open the attic door, a stale, musty smell hit me, a mixture of old wood, mold, and time itself. The flashlight scanned the cluttered space, piles of boxes, broken furniture, faded photographs, and yellowed papers scattered like fallen leaves. At the center, an old desk stood, its surface covered in loose papers and a single envelope addressed to me in my father's unmistakable handwriting. My heart pounded as I approached. The envelope was fragile, the ink faded but legible. I sank to the floor, carefully breaking the seal. Inside was a letter, long, rambling, filled with apologies, instructions and warnings. He had tried to prepare me for what lay ahead, to pass on the burden he'd carried for years. There were names, places, debts, and secrets I had never known. The letter ended with a chilling line, "Don't forget, Mark. Don't let it consume you as it consumed me." I folded the letter carefully, tears streaming down my face as the full weight of the past crashed down on me. The attic seemed to close in, the shadows deepening, whispering promises of both doom and redemption. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying the echoes of a voice that would not be silenced. "Fix it, Mark," it whispered again. "Fix it, before it's too late." The attic was colder than I expected. a cavern of forgotten memories and silent regrets. The letter in my hands burned with the weight of its words, each sentence a tether pulling me deeper into a past I had desperately tried to avoid. But there was no running anymore. Not tonight, not ever again. I sat cross-legged on the wooden floor, the flashlight beam flickering across the scattered papers around me. Bills, receipts, handwritten notes, and my father's hurried scrawl. Some pages were soaked with age and moisture, others stained with coffee or tears. They told a story, one I hadn't been ready to hear until now. The debts had piled up, a mountain of financial ruin my father had tried to conceal. Creditors called. Late at night, their voices harsh and unforgiving. But he never wanted me to worry. The house, once a warm refuge, had become a prison. And the promise I'd made to keep it safe, to carry on his legacy, was slipping through my fingers like sand. As I sifted through the papers, a folded map slipped out from between the pages. It was marked with strange symbols and notes in the margins, locations I didn't recognize. I traced the lines with trembling fingers, realizing this was more than just a list of debts and bills. It was mapped to something hidden, something important. Before I could process what that might mean, the silence in the attic was shattered. By a sudden, sharp noise, a thud from below, my heart jumped and I froze, the flashlight trembling in my hand. Dad. I called out, my voice cracking with a mix of hope and fear. No answer, only the echo of my own breath. The house groaned, settling in the night. But something else was there, a presence lingering in the shadows, watching me, waiting. I stood, gripping the letter tightly, and made my way down the creaky ladder. The living room was just as cold, and dark as before, but the oppressive feeling had deepened. The chair sat empty, yet it seemed to radiate an energy that filled the entire space. As I moved through the house, memories flooded me, moments I had forgotten or pushed away. My father's laughter echoing in the kitchen, his voice calling me for dinner, the long talks about the future we'd never have, all gone, replaced by this eerie silence and the haunting echo of his words. I knew I had to start fixing things, to honor the promise I'd made, but the question was, how? The letter had mentioned names, people my father trusted, places I'd never been. It hinted at secrets buried beneath the surface of our family history, things I hadn't dared to explore. The next morning, with the first light filtering through the curtains, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, the letter and map spread before me. I made a list of the names, addresses, and tasks mentioned, knowing this would be the start of a long journey. But even as I planned, the feeling of being watched never left. Throughout the day, I caught glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of shadow, a whisper of a voice too faint to catch. At night, the voice came again, softer but no less urgent. Fix it, Mark, fix it. Each time, it was a reminder that the past wasn't done with me. My father's presence lingered, both a guide and a warning, pushing me to uncover what I'd ignored for so long. That night, I dreamed of the basement, the dark, cold place where my father had spent his last days. I saw myself as a boy, running through the empty halls, searching for something I couldn't name. The dream was vivid, filled with the sounds of footsteps and whispered promises. I woke up drenched in sweat, the voice still echoing in my mind. Fix it. I knew then that this was more than a haunting. It was a reckoning. A chance to confront the mistakes of the past and maybe, just maybe, make things right. But the road ahead was uncertain, filled with shadows and memories I wasn't sure I was ready to face. Still, I had a promise to keep. The next morning I woke with a knot in my stomach and the weight of that haunting promise heavy on my mind. Fix it. The words echoed relentlessly, stirring a restless urgency I couldn't ignore. I forced myself to eat breakfast, but the food sat cold in my stomach. My eyes kept drifting back to the letter and the mysterious map I had found in the attic. They were more than just paper. They were a roadmap to my father's unfinished business. The list of names on the letter was my first clue. People he trusted, friends and acquaintances from a past life I barely knew. Their addresses were scribbled down in that shaky handwriting and I realized these were places I needed to visit if I was going to begin fixing what had broken. I grabbed a notebook and started mapping out a route, jotting down details and possible questions. The first name was Evelyn. The note said, "Keep her close. She holds the key." I didn't know who Evelyn was, but the sense of importance was undeniable. Driving through the quiet streets, I felt like an intruder in my own life. The town had changed since my father's death. New faces, new buildings, and the creeping feeling that something was waiting for me just beneath the surface. Evelyn's house was at the end of a narrow lane, hidden behind overgrown hedges and a rusted iron gate. I hesitated before ringing the bell, the letter clenched tightly in my hand. The door creaked open before I could knock, revealing an elderly woman with sharp eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. "You must be Mark," she said softly, stepping aside to let me in. Her voice was familiar somehow, tinged with sadness and wisdom. "Your father spoke of you often, even in his darkest days." Inside, the house was cluttered but warm, filled with faded photographs and relics of a life intertwined with my father's. Evelyn motioned for me to sit at a worn wooden table, where a small stack of papers awaited. "We've been waiting." "For you," she said quietly. "Your father left instructions, but he was too afraid to face what was coming. He knew you would have to finish this." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words settle like a stone in my chest. "What is this? What do I need to do?" Evelyn handed me a faded envelope, its edges frayed and brittle. Inside were documents detailing debts, legal disputes, and cryptic references to a family trust I'd never heard of. But the most alarming were the warnings notes about someone or something that had been threatening my father's legacy. Shadows lurking behind every transaction. "You're not just dealing with unpaid bills," Evelyn said, her voice dropping. "There are people who want to see this family broken. Your father did what he could to protect you." I nodded, though I felt overwhelmed by the complexity and the danger I was suddenly thrust into. This was bigger than I imagined. Over the next few days, I visited more names on the list. Old friends, former employees, distant relatives. Each meeting revealed more pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known existed. Web of debts, secrets, and threats tied to our family name. One afternoon, I met with an old business partner of my father's named Henry. He was a gruff man, his face weathered by years of hard living. Henry spoke cautiously, but admitted there had been strange occurrences, threatening calls, unexplained break-ins, and a shadowy figure that had haunted my father in his last months. They said he'd pay the price if he didn't back down. Henry said grimly, "You gotta be careful, Mark. There are people who won't stop until they've taken everything." That night, as I returned home, the creeping dread I had felt since the first encounter with my father's voice intensified. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something following me. Inside the house, the shadows seemed to stretch longer and darker than before. The chair in the living room sat silently, yet it carried a presence I couldn't ignore. And then, just as I was about to go to bed, I heard it again, the soft whisper that had haunted my nights. "Fix it, Mark." The voice was closer this time, almost beside me, sending chills down my spine. I swallowed my fear and spoke into the darkness. "I'm trying, but I don't even know what it is yet." Silence answered me, except for the faint rustling of papers on the desk. I glanced over and saw the letter and map glowing faintly. Under the moonlight spilling through the window, determined, I returned my focus to them. The map had markings pointing to a location deep in the woods outside town, a place I'd never visited, but that now seemed pivotal. The next day, I set out for the woods, the weight of the promise anchoring my steps. As I walked deeper into the forest, the sun disappeared behind thick branches, shadows dancing with every step. When I reached the spot marked on the map, I found a hidden cellar door partially covered by moss and dirt. My hands trembled as I cleared away the debris and pulled it open. A musty, cold air rose from the dark opening. Taking a deep breath, I descended the creaky wooden stairs, flashlight in hand. Below was a room filled with dusty crates, old furniture, and stacks of forgotten papers. But what caught my attention was a small wooden box sitting on a table, carved with the same symbols I'd seen on the map. I opened it carefully. Inside lay a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon, my father's handwriting on every envelope. I unfolded the top letter, and as I read, a story unfolded, one of sacrifice, betrayal, and a secret he kept from me to protect our family. The final lines chilled me. If you're reading this, Mark, it means I failed to keep my promise. Now it's up to you to right the wrongs and protect what matters most. The weight of those words pressed down on me like never before. As I stood in that dark cellar, surrounded by the ghosts of the past, I realized that fixing what I had. Broken meant confronting not just debts and secrets, but the very shadows that had haunted my father, and now me. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying a faint voice on the breeze. Fix it, Mark, before it's too late. The cellar felt colder than the rest of the house, the air thick with dust and the smell of decay. I shivered despite. My jacket, gripping the letters tightly as if they were a lifeline, my father's words reverberated in my mind. Now it's up to you to right the wrongs and protect what matters most. But I had no idea what that meant in practical terms. I wasn't just sorting papers or paying bills anymore. This felt bigger, darker, and far more personal. I climbed back up the stairs slowly, my flashlight cutting narrow paths through the shadows. The living room welcomed me with its familiar yet oppressive quiet. The chair was still in the corner, but its presence felt heavier now, as if it knew what I had discovered. I placed the letters on the coffee table, glancing around nervously. It was absurd, but I half expected my father's silhouette to emerge from the shadows at any second. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the memory of his voice echoing in my ears. Fix it, Mark. Before it's too late, I tried to focus on breathing, on logic, but the shadows in the corners of my room seemed to pulse, growing darker with each passing minute. I thought I saw movement, a flicker of a familiar figure near the doorway. My heart raced and I pulled the covers over my head, whispering apologies into the dark. When I finally drifted into a fitful sleep, I dreamt of him. Not the father I remembered, but a distorted figure, hollow-eyed and stern. He pointed toward the attic, toward the cellar, and his voice echoed, "You left it. Fix it, or it will be too late." I woke with a start, sweat chilling on my skin. The room was silent, yet I could still feel the pressure of his gaze, and a cold draft brushed against my face. The next morning, I returned to the attic. The letters and map were still where I'd left them, but now I understood they were instructions, not just a history lesson. The map indicated a second location, deeper in the woods past the cellar. This was where the real work would begin. My father's voice, once soothing in my memories, now felt accusatory, demanding. I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. The hike to the second location was grueling. The forest thickened as I went deeper, shadows stretching unnaturally long. I kept glancing behind me, convinced that someone or something was following. My imagination tried to fill the silence with whispers, and I could almost hear my father's voice in the rustling leaves. Fix it, Mark. Finally, I reached a clearing marked on the map. There, partially buried under dirt and vines, was an old chest. It looked ancient, the wood weathered and cracked. My hands shook as I brushed away the debris and pried it open. Inside were more letters, photographs, and a small locked box. The letters chronicled my father's struggles, debts, legal disputes, and threats from people I hadn't known existed. But the box held the most chilling discovery, documents tied to a trust fund, revealing that someone had been manipulating our family finances for years, slowly draining everything my father had built. A sudden creak behind me made my blood run cold. The shadows at the edge of the clearing thickened, coalescing into a shape I recognized immediately. My father, or a version of him, hollow and flickering like a dying memory. His eyes bore into mine, accusing and unyielding. "You see it now," he said, his voice layered with static and anger. "You see what you ignored. You left me to fight it alone, Mark. Alone. I swallowed, trying to find words. I didn't know. I didn't understand. You always knew, he replied sharply. That's why it's your turn. You. Fix it, or it consumes you? I glanced at the box, realizing it held the key. My father's warnings weren't just about settling debts or organizing paperwork. They were about confronting the people who had stolen from us. The forces that had haunted him in life and refused to let go in death. I unlocked the small box and found a stack of papers and old photographs. Names scrawled across each one, addresses, notes about meetings and transactions. It was a roadmap to the culprits, the manipulators, the ones who had stolen our families. Legacy, and then I felt it, a cold, pressing presence behind me. The shadows weren't just remnants of the forest. They were him, my father, lingering, observing, waiting for me to act. For hours I pored over the documents, making plans, mapping routes, and memorizing names. Every decision weighed heavily, each choice a potential mistake that could haunt me forever. And through it all I could hear him, faint, relentless. Fix it, Mark. Fix it before it's too late. When I finally returned home, the house felt different. The shadows no longer seemed static. They whispered in the corners, urging me, reminding me. I could feel the unfinished business pressing down on me like a living thing. The chair in the living room seemed to lean forward slightly, watching. I knew I had to act. The people on the list, the debts, the trust, the threats, they wouldn't fix themselves. That night, I began making calls, reaching out to contacts my father had trusted, and confronting individuals who had wronged him. Each conversation was tense, filled with resistance, but I persisted, motivated by the relentless presence of his voice in my mind. I could feel him in the room with me, silent yet demanding, ensuring I didn't falter. Hours turned into days, and slowly, the first signs of progress emerged. A debt settled, a threat neutralized, a document recovered. Each victory was a small victory over the shadows that had haunted my father and now me. And yet, even as I worked, I knew this was only the beginning. In the dead of night, I sat in the living room, staring at the chair where his presence had felt strongest. The air was thick, heavy, but quieter than before. I could almost see him in the corner, a faint outline of the father I had loved, but with eyes that demanded accountability. Fix it, the whisper returned, soft but unwavering. Finish what I started. I nodded to the empty room, knowing that I would. No matter the time, no matter the cost, I would honor the promise. The following days were a blur of activity. I had compiled all the letters, photographs, and documents, each one a breadcrumb leading me through my father's unfinished business. Every phone call, every email, every confrontation I initiated was another step into a world I'd never known. Existed a world my father had fought in silence while I slept, oblivious. The weight of his presence pressed on me constantly, subtle yet unmistakable, like the faint chill of a shadow brushing my skin. At night, the living room became my vigil post. I would sit in the chair opposite the one my father had always occupied, studying the faint indent left from his spectral visits. Sometimes I swore I could feel him in the room, pacing behind me or leaning over my shoulder, his eyes silently, judging my progress. Fix it, Mark, before it's too late. The words haunted my dreams, echoing like a metronome, measuring my failures and my small victories alike. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the house, I received a call that made my stomach knot. It was from a lawyer my father had trusted, someone I'd never met but whose name appeared on almost every letter and note I had sorted. Mark, he said, voice grave, you don't understand what's at stake. Whoever did this isn't just stealing money. They're erasing history, erasing family. You have to stop them before it's too late. The warning only strengthened my resolve. I spent that night compiling evidence, cross-referencing financial records with addresses, names, and bank accounts. Every shred of information felt sacred, infused with my father's lingering presence. guiding me toward decisions I didn't fully understand but instinctively knew were right. The shadows in the room no longer felt menacing. They felt like silent partners pushing me forward. As I organized the documents, the temperature in the living room dropped. I looked up to see a faint silhouette of my father sitting in his favorite chair, the details of his face obscured by darkness, but the posture unmistakable. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and whispered, "You're doing it. Keep going, don't stop." I felt a mixture of relief and relief that I had his approval, sorrow for the years I had wasted ignoring him. The next morning, I traveled to the first location indicated in the letters, a small, forgotten branch of my father's business that had been mismanaged after his death. The building was dilapidated, dust covering everything like a layer of forgotten time. As I walked through the empty offices, I imagined him there, correcting mistakes, organizing ledgers, protecting his legacy. I realized then that what I was doing wasn't just for me, it was for him, for the years he had spent fighting alone. I worked tirelessly, speaking to former employees, reclaiming documents, and confronting those responsible for the financial sabotage. Each step brought me closer to the truth, and with each revelation, I felt my father's presence grow warmer, lighter, less accusing. His voice no longer chilled me, it guided me. "That's right, Mark. That's how it's done." Days blended into nights, and gradually the pieces began to fall into place. Debts were settled, accounts were recovered, and the culprits who had tormented my family were exposed. Each victory was quiet yet profound, a reconciliation of the past with the present. I knew my father would never truly rest, but I also knew I was honoring him by facing the unfinished business head-on. One evening, as I sat in the living room, exhausted and emotionally drained, I felt a sudden warmth envelop the room. The chair's faint indent shimmered with a soft, golden light, and the air no longer carried the biting chill of my father's anger. I looked up and saw him, or what felt like him, standing in the corner, not menacing, not demanding, but calm. His voice, gentle now, spoke directly into my mind. "You kept your promise. You remembered me. You remembered us." Tears filled my eyes as I whispered, "I'm sorry I took so long, Dad. I didn't know. I didn't understand." He smiled, a soft, fleeting expression that reminded me of the man I had loved. "It's okay, Mark. You remembered when it mattered. That's what counts." The golden light slowly faded, the shadows receding, leaving the living room quiet once more. But this time, it was a comfortable silence, not the oppressive weight that had haunted me for so long. I knew he was gone, or perhaps finally at peace. And for the first time in years, I felt free to breathe, to exist without the constant pressure of unfinished business. Even so, I couldn't ignore the lessons I had learned. The house, the shadows, the presence of my father, they had all been a reminder that promises to the dead are never just symbolic. They carry weight, responsibility, and consequences that reach far beyond a single life. I spent the following days organizing the attic, cataloging everything I had reclaimed, making sure that nothing would be forgotten again. Finally, after weeks of relentless work, I sat in the living room and allowed myself a moment of peace. The chair was empty, the air warm and still. The shadows no longer pressed against the walls, and the oppressive feeling that had haunted every corner of my home had lifted. I knew my father would never truly leave me. He was part of my memory, my decisions, my life, but the anger, the guilt, the fear that had once dominated the house had dissipated. I stood, taking a deep breath, and whispered to the empty room, "I fixed it, Dad. I finally fixed it." For the first time in 5 years, I felt a sense of closure. I had faced the shadows, confronted the unfinished business, and honored the man who had shaped my life. The house felt lighter, warmer, alive, with memory rather than grief. And as I looked out the window at the first light of dawn, I felt my father's presence not as a weight, but as a quiet, guiding hand, finally at peace, finally at rest. Promises to the dead are never forgotten, but when they are fulfilled, They can heal, they can guide, and they can finally release both the living and the departed from the chains of regret.